I'd like to introduce Jerry Grassel. We've been watching him for how many years now write this book. I think he writes it here and also over in Wausau, Clintonville. And it's been really fun to see him going through the process of not only capturing all of his memoirs, but talking to all of his friends, capturing their memories, and then putting it into a book form, including making sure he gets copyrighted, the proper copyright on the photographs and an ISBN. So he really has learned a lot over the years, and he's never satisfied. He keeps coming in and saying he's going to change things and make them better. So yeah, I've also heard a number of the stories, and they're really interesting. He's brought some mementos over there. He'll tell you about it, but it just amazes me that a kid from Sturgeon Bay at 18 years old ends up in Germany in the security agency. So, Jerry?
Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you to the rest of the library staff. It's been helpful. I want to welcome you here. I've done presentations before, but mostly to school groups, one college and several high school. So this is a different dynamics for me. I've altered things quite a bit. In the high school, we're teaching them history. I relate to them as being their grandfather or great-grandfather because they're 14 to 18 years old. And we touch on the draft and things a lot, and that's not going to be the case with the group we have here today. You aren't quite as diverse. We don't have young people.
If you want to change the pictures.
Okay. Okay, we're talking about. So thank you, Laura, and please pass. There were people at the desk down there that helped too. I'm going to give you a little presentation. This won't take real long. It'll take probably 20 to 25 minutes. Then I hope to pass some items around, have some freewheeling, answer any questions you have that I am capable of answering, and give a little information on writing a book if any of you are so interested. Most of you are aware that there was something still was called the Cold War. It lasted from the late 40s till about the time President Reagan and who was it?
Gorbachev.
Pardon? Gorbachev met and finally supposedly buried the hatchet. What do I have to push?
There you go.
You say one of these?
Yeah, this will.
Okay, that's a group that we went to school a long time because we were learning International Morse Code, which was a standard 23-week course for our group. When we were drafted, the people in that picture were drafted. It was 2 years if you enlisted. If you wanted something more or better, they made you take another year. So they came to many of us and said, your scores are high, you can go in the Army Security Agency. Okay, my friend and I did do that, and they found out that we could have the aptitude to learn International Morse Code. For anybody who is not aware, that's what you see in movies. It was diddy-diddy-da-da-did-dip. And the reason they use International Morse Code, and still do, is that it sometimes can go through bad weather or atmospheric conditions that voice doesn't carry. Although with modern technology, they're pretty much ahead of that. So we went in, we took the 23 weeks International Morse Code, and all of a sudden we found out we were going to another school. The other school was in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which is the home of the Army Security Agency at the time. We all looked very happy on there because we thought 23 weeks getting close. I can't see. This is me at about 5'10". If you notice those other, I think we had 8 guys that were 6'1" or taller. Why that happened, I don't know. And I believe three of them were career people. that their unit sent them, they learned the International Morse code, they went back to their armor, cavalry, infantry, wherever they were from. The rest of us were sent directly in 2 days up to Fort Devens, and there we learned additional schooling that we used when we got to Europe. I'll get to it a little later. It was called Communications Countermeasures, and they later changed that, calling it electronic warfare. So that's a sandy, hot place. It was, I think, the 15th of August, very hot, and we're happy. I think it was happy getting our schooling in because we're going to go where it was cooler. Around Augusta, Georgia, in the summer is not a place for many Yankees. Okay. We got trained at the second place, Devens. That training took, I think, 9 or 10 weeks. We learned to operate machinery that would be used to track East German Russian communications and do other things, playing with their communications. I didn't know the equipment existed, but it does. It's usually mounted at that time. We're talking a long time ago. It was usually mounted on the back of big 2.5 trucks. I'm sure the Air Force had similar equipment, and I know the Navy had similar equipment. So we went to Europe, and our purpose was to refute, halt, buffer, stop the Russians and the people they controlled from expanding further westward. You've heard the Cold War certificate over there since it started in 45. It really got going good in the late 40s when Russia had gone way beyond Poland, almost halfway through Germany, Czechoslovakia, many of the countries down close to Italy. So President Eisenhower, okay, yeah, Lori knows. That is the map at the time where the westward expansion by the Russians. And I use the word Russians because they were more in charge of the satellites than we were ever in charge of the Western nations. I think it was in the late 48 or something like that that the Western nations formed NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to get together to stop these people from expanding further. Okay, let's see here. Well, now that is the picture of Germany, but the Iron Curtain ran pretty much along this line here. So they occupied Czechoslovakia, Poland, and this would be Czechoslovakia, I believe. Oh, there it is. Okay, a little harder to get close. So we said we didn't want to go any further, and they wanted to go further, and it became a stalemate. It was called the Cold War, and thank goodness it never got hot. There were many, many minor skirmishes along the border, and eventually, I think the first country that was under Russian control was Austria. Got its freedom in the late 50s, if I'm not sure. That the France, Britain, United States, and Russia were in Austria, and I think we basically, all 4 countries left generally at the same time. I don't have a real grasp of the history. It's just what I've run into writing this book, so I don't have all the dates completely correct. But we got over there, and there were, from the previous picture, there were about 3 men went back to their units where they originally came from the first school. 3 or 4 of the men that went through the school at Fort Devens in Massachusetts stayed in the United States. I didn't know why that decision. I believe there were 14 of us that got sent over to Germany. I'm not doing that well. Okay. All right. Okay. What would be the next one after?
There's the pictures of the fields.
Okay, very good. What we did when we got to Germany, at first our equipment wasn't there. There were 6 or 7 other Americans, soldiers with our training that were there. And our equipment wasn't there, and they thought it would come momentarily or in a week or 2, but things in the military don't always go as scheduled. Usually they go slower than scheduled. What happened is we got sent to an operations building with the people who had gone to the 23 weeks of school at Gordon or up at Devon's. And what they did is they sat at consoles monitoring East Germans and Russian communications, the International Morse Code. We had that training, so we were sent there. 6 weeks later, our equipment came from France. I went to some base in France by mistake. Getting things straightened out in military. Sometimes no one wants to admit blame, so they argue back and forth rather than fixing the problem. But eventually we got our equipment. So we got out of that building where for 2 years we would have just monitored International Morse Code. And then we started going out on missions, on maneuvers. The base that we were at had about 450 American soldiers. They were all an Army security agency, except a few of the officers. It had maybe 150, 200 Air Force. And I think the Air Force did the same as we. At that time, you kept your mouth shut. You didn't talk about your work, except the people you worked actually with. So we would take our equipment, which was state-of-the-art, very high class. Gotta remember, we didn't have satellites beeping and buzzing up there. It wasn't until a few years after that that Gary Powers got shot down, flying, what, 70-some thousand feet or whatever. So it was electronics, if you want to call it that, or radio waves that we tried to intercept and listen. On our base, we had 4 main type of what I would call spying techniques. Now, we weren't spies in the sense, I think the presentation said electronic spying. We weren't spying in the technique that we put a cloak and dagger and marched and hid in the city and tried to get undercover information. We did it by listening to radio waves. There were other people, of course, at the time that were, I believe in the NSA, CIA, clandestine, just, going to these cities and risking their lives. I'm going to briefly go through the type of, the 4 types of electronic spying that was done on that base. I want to make sure the people that were there were trained in basically one of the 4 ways. And we were young. Many of them weren't career people. The career people were given jobs that required more security clearance, such as maintaining the equipment, playing with the equipment, using the equipment intensely, and analyzing information. The people I worked with were all on their first tour. Beyond that, you'd get a promotion to work inside what they call the operations building. We got to Europe. Like I said, there were about 14 of us. We all went to Frankfurt first, and got to Frankfurt. Half the people went further on the train, and the rest of us that I was involved with, we went back north about 120 miles to a city called Grassel, K-A-S-S-E-L. We had a small base outside of there, maybe 8 or 10 miles. It was a base that Hitler built in the 30s for his reconnaissance spy planes. So the duty was very good. We had 2-man rooms because Hitler wanted to reward his loyal pilots. But that's where we were stationed. Now, after the first 8 weeks when our equipment came, we were charged with duties to go out and work with troops out in the field, maneuvers, training bases, Some of the bigger cities in Germany had bases all around them. At this time, I don't know, there were hundreds and thousands of Americans in that area. The British probably had 100,000. The French, somebody was smart enough to keep the French down in the corner towards France, because the French and the Germans didn't get along good. And I'm not sure how good they get along now, but they have reasons to hold grudges, I guess, if you study history, especially in the area southwestern Germany and northeastern France has been traded and bartered and bickered about, I think, for a couple of centuries, as many of the borders do over there. All right, the first group of people that we met that did spy work that I remember were people that were trained in RDF. And that was actually something that occurred, I believe, is back 10 or 15 years sooner. RDF stands for Radio Direction Finding. So if I were to ask you, I'll simply illustrate it very easily. If I were to ask three of you to go out in a hall and be blindfolded, and they'd bring you back in, and I would put one of you here, one there, and one over there, and I would move somewhere else, and I would start talking. I would ask all three of you to point at me, just by my voice. Well, that's in simple form. That's what radio direction finding was, to determine where the signals were coming from for the East Germans or the Russians or whoever we thought the enemy was. So one machine would point like this, another one like that. They'd form a triangle or some type of apex. And as time went by, that became very, very, very professional. They got to the point where they could get it within a couple hundred yards. Now with what they got, they get it within inches, I suppose. But that's what was done at the time. They had a group of people that went to training somewhere else, I don't know where, probably another Army security agency, because they were on an ASA base. So they had radio direction finding. Then the next one we ran into was VFP. That stands for voice fingerprint. And that was around before that. My voice is changing as I'm getting older, but everybody's voice has a peculiar pattern, volume. Just those people that study it can tell you. Everybody's voice pattern is different, some are similar. So what they did is they would listen to what they thought were East German movement, generals, colonels, majors, and they could pinpoint where they identified Malinsky or whatever name they gave them, code names. And there were people that listened to these voices. Their job was to analyze and compare where they were. Now, sometimes they tried to tape record people or change their voices. The voice fingerprint people were assigned to the problem or task of solving, were you being tricked or were you not being tricked? So they would take the voice fingerprint from, could have been a sergeant, could have been a Russian colonel, putting that together with what the radio direction finder did, keep track of the movements in East Germany. Place that was very, very hot on the border, where they expected a war to break out if there would be one, was a city called Fulda, and across the border in East Germany was Magdeburg. They weren't far apart, maybe 60 miles, I'm not sure, it wasn't far. And I'm going to go to the other one. There were, on our base, I never met them, but there were some there. There were people who were linguists. They would listen to people talking and try and analyze what they were saying. If there were coded messages, I was not very aware of how they operated, but they would try and analyze what the people said. And we were told half the time they were maybe lying, trying to deceive us, and on our side, we were playing the same game. Now that's a voice fingerprint, radio direction, and linguists. We came into it as what you'd call communications countermeasures. Later on, they changed the title to electronic warfare, which is pretty high term at that time. This was way back in the late 50s, so we would go out in the field, set up different places, put our antennas up, crank up our generators, turn our instruments on, go up on a hill for good reception, as close to the borders where we dare, usually 5 kilometers or more, and we would try and listen to communications on the other side of the border. And we would type it out and send it back to the analysts. The analysts did whatever analysts do with it. They're never privy to know. They never complained that we were doing a good job or not doing a good job. Usually, they were more concerned with where we were. If we cut too many trees down, the German forester sent the American government a very big bill. That was part of what was happening at that time, and they weren't shy because the United States has got no end of money, I guess. So we would go to different places and monitor the Russians and East Germans, and I assume they did it to us. But at the same time, when we were told they were doing maneuvers, we had machines that would jam them, put static on the air. So we would try and play games with their messages to each other. I never found out if we were successful at all, or very successful, or halfway, or maybe in November, but not in July. So that was our group, the ones that went out of that picture, that we were working in the International Morse Code. They called some of them ditty boppers because they could transmit, you've seen the old westerns with telegraph, same thing, a key where they just pulse up and down. Some guys were extremely good. They could go very fast. I guess I got to 30 words a minute. Anything after that was a blur, but people who had an aptitude for that could do things twice as fast. I know there are machines that send it and receive it also. So that, we would, when we weren't out on maneuver, messing with the Eastern people on the other side of Iron Curtain, we would go to other bases and try and train their communications people how to be a little more effective with their communications. That would be Signal Corps people, or if you went to an armored division, infantry, they would bring their people in a room where we would talk and try and give some lessons. It didn't always go over too good, because most of us were between 19 and 24 years old, and there were people being brought in that were 8 to 10 years older, and that seemed like an awful lot, and they, I hate to use the word, were supposed to be obedient and listen, and we were supposed to test them. That didn't work out too well. When you had a career person that, you know, was 8 to 10 years before he would feel that he didn't need to be treated that way. And in some cases, they probably didn't need to be treated that way. The biggest flaw that we found amongst our own communications people was in one particular area. And they stressed this over and over, and I don't know if it was laziness or they didn't understand it. I'll try and explain it best I can. When you send somebody a message, either at the beginning or the end, you're supposed to authenticate it. They're supposed to know what the authentication code is. You're not supposed to use that code but one time. And for some reason, the biggest fault they had was to reuse the authentication code, and the people on the other end would accept it. So if the enemy heard a code and copied it, sent a message later that day, the person receiving it, if they didn't know that it had been used or crossed off on their list, could actually move a whole group of soldiers in the wrong direction. authentication code. At the time we were there, it was in a binder, I think a loose leaf binder. They had like numbers across the top, 0 through 9, or 1 through 0, whatever. And on the side they would have alphabet. So it was just plain chart, 1 through 9, maybe A through M. So when you send something, when you got down there in the beginning, you say authentication. You could take 5M. So you go up to 5 down to M, simple book. And in that box, it might have NX. The other guy is supposed to have his book for that day or that hour. Check out what you said. If it's NX, it's supposed to be gospel. Then it's supposed to cross it off so they can never use it again. The biggest problem we had over and over was they would use the same code that was used earlier that day or the next day. And for the life of us, we couldn't figure out why they did that. Poor training, I'm not sure, but that was the biggest problem. So you could actually move units. And sometimes they would ask for a second identification code. So you use the same grid work for that day, but you use a different, instead of 5N or whatever, you use 3Q, and you go out and you get two symbols in that X. But they were never used. Sometimes we changed them every 12 hours. So usually when you change something like that, at that time, they would have what they call umpires, or people in Jeeps running around telling you which page to turn to. In other words, we're not going to use page 16 anymore. We'll go to page 17 and use a new system of codes on that. So that's basically what we did. And we trained mostly Americans. Once in a while we would go to the British zone, but they were usually Americans, and we would go on the maneuvers when we would just mess with the East Germans and the Russians. I didn't know until I started working on this book and reading some things that the East Germans and the Russians didn't get along nearly as well as I thought they did. The East Germans wanted them out, and it took a long time. But there were maybe career people that knew that, but I didn't know. Okay, do we have a couple more pictures on here? Okay, let's just look at a couple others.
You can just double click and
Double click here.
yeah. On the picture.
Okay, this is a very clear picture of the Iron Curtain and meter strip, and from my understanding it was smuggled from somebody in East Germany to an American, probably for cigarettes. You hear cigarettes were a big thing. Cigarettes, petroleum, and they had a lot of alcohol on their side. But if you notice, there is a white cross there. I'm assuming somebody tried to escape and died along the way. I'm not sure. Right? This picture was given to me from one of the other guys, and that's the way he heard it. This was earlier. The Iron Curtain was not all built in one day. It ran all the way from the northern border way down to, I'm not sure, Greece or somewhere in that area. We have another one, similar, the updated one. This was out in the rural area. I'm not sure what country it was in. Yeah, thank you. That is a later picture. You can see a guard tower, 2 strands of barbed wire fences. I don't think it was electric, and another plowed meter strip. So they were there. It was hundreds of miles long, and that's what I didn't notice when I saw it first, strands of barbed wire in the bottom. So that's your typical Iron Curtain. It's a long time. I don't know if they made money. I don't know if the contractors made money, but it got done. And as you've heard and seen, people got shot trying to escape. So in that border, they were shot for trying to get out.
So would this be looking east?
I'm not sure that those borders curved all around. we would say Eastern Bloc country, so I can see why we would think that way. But you go around crooks and crannies and corners, it probably would have been easterly. No, I'm just going to stop pretty quick here, and I have some things I'm going to hand out. I'll do a couple things here. How many of you have been in the service? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your service. This is from chapter 2 in my book. We had a very large building, and our company employed a German tailor. A lot of the work on the bases was done by civilians to try and get the Germans' economy back on. In November 1958, I asked my mother to send me my father's dimensions, and she sent them, gave the dimensions to the German tailor. He made this from the dimensions, probably made them metric, but worked it out. So I've had this. My father always liked, at that time, a zipper on the sleeve, so I had the zipper on the sleeve, the little metal's gone, and one button's missing. If I remember correctly, I paid $2 for his labor and $2 for the material. And he would work on Army material, altering, putting stripes on, off, changing shape. In the evening, he would work on things that he made money, pullover sweaters. So he did pretty good work. If you want to come up after a while, you'll be interested. One button's missing. It'd be interesting to see how he made the buttonholes. Cut a hole in it, and just kept seaming around it for reinforcement. So it was interesting to watch him work. He didn't have a steam iron. What he had was an old thin army blanket. He'd dip it in, wring it out, put the item down his ironing board and go over with the whatnot. But there were probably American people doing the same kind of steam cleaning with a sheet at the time. It was a long time ago. And this is just, it's got dates of the Cold War on here. And they say 2nd of September 45 to 26th December 91. There were other wars going on, weren't there? Vietnam, very nasty. So I don't know what political people got together and decided on that. When I started on this, I was trying to find dates of the Cold War, and they varied all over. One person said, from when we didn't get along with Russia until we got along with them, whatever that is. So I think it's very subjective, but this gives it a date of status. Okay, I'm going to ask, if you people have any questions, I went pretty fast because I don't know what your time is. Yes, ma'am.
I missed the very beginning. Were you posted in West Germany?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We trained.
Spying on East Germany.
We were posted, after we went for our training in the United States, we were posted close to the border in West Germany. If you look at a map of Germany, you find Frankfurt. We were about 125 miles north of there. But at that time, there were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of American bases for Air Force and Army throughout all Germany. Most of them were, I would say, 10 or more miles from the Iron Curtain. Some over 100 miles. Anybody else have questions?
How long were you there?
I was there 2 years, November of 57 to November of 59. I'm going to pass some things out. Of course, if you want to buy my book, I wouldn't say no to that. But I'm going to pass, this is a table of contents of the different stories. And I have it color-coded. The majority of the story, I wrote this book at the urging of my Army friends. We had a reunion in 2007, which was 50 years. And somehow the guy who arranged it knew I went to college. And he said, we're going to send them to you, you write a book. So well, it was easy because they sent almost all pictures with their comments.
No
I
words,
said,
just
I'm
pictures.
going to take the poetic license and change some of your comments. So they're kind of funny. Guys are smiling. You're lucky to have that many after 50 years, so you can glance at that. I wrote this, had it done at PIP by cameras and offset presses. Now you have to get someone that formats it, and it's just not done by photography anymore. Great fun doing that. We had another reunion in 12. About half the guys were deceased, they're too ill. And at that time they said, Jerry, why don't you write a real book? So that's what I did. I did a lot of research with my friends. I only know of 2 of them died this year in July. I only know of 2 others that are alive. Yes.
So were you prohibited from disclosing anything about your service for a
Yes.
period of time afterwards?
Yes, my job. Yeah.
Okay.
They told us they would let us know when we could talk about it.
Okay.
But what I'm talking about was done during the Second World War. So since I'm not taking a picture of the inside of my unit, I'm not worried about it.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to pass. I have these, as I said, color-coded. The yellow square relates to civilians and Germans in the chapter. The pink is hijinks, messing amongst ourselves, and the triangle is actual spying going on. So if you want to take one and pass it on, that'd be fine. And then I'm going to pass some pictures out here.
He was 73, 74.
There's a couple war coupon books in here from Second World War that belonged to my mother. There's German money in here. So if you want to look at these and pass them around, take 1 or 2 and pass them around. Usually the back of each picture tells what page it is in the book. Now that picture there was from the Marshall Plan. The money that was built in about 1948, a showplace. Each large city in Europe was given money, each large city in Germany, I should say, was given money from the Marshall Plan. And they spent it, around the corner from that one picture, there were still bombed out buildings. So, if that goes around, if you have questions or questions on the book, chapters, pictures, I'll be glad to answer.
Jerry, you said another boy from Sturgeon Bay joined with
Yes,
you. How
yes.
did you happen to join up? People were drafted at that time?
Well,
you had to choose?
we were going to be drafted, but we thought we would join up and get it over with, as many American young men did. We got down in Milwaukee, and they said, you can be on the buddy system. Well, the buddy system guaranteed you'd be together for basic training or basic training in your schooling. Fortunately for us, our test scores were so similar. We went to basic with some of those other guys, that first picture. We stuck together. About 7 of us were together for the whole 2 years, 11 months, and 22 days. So because of our training and our ability to do the same work, they just kept us together because that's what we did. There were only, when we were in Europe, there were probably 18 to 20 soldiers that could do that work, and probably the same amount of Air Force. So, any other questions, Laura?
And you said that when you were being checked out by the FBI, they came to Sturgeon Bay. Was that
Right. There's so much that we can't get it done. When we signed up for the ASA, they said, okay, it took next year, now list references in your hometown. I listed my high school principal, a teacher, a coach, and the person I worked for in an automotive wholesale store. All right, I found out, see, while we were going through basic, they checked out these people, or references. And if they didn't give you a high reference, you could go in the ASA, but they'd put you in the motor pool or a cook. You didn't get a, lack of a better word, a higher class job. You often end up in a cook and then a motor pool. You didn't handle highly classified information. Then after we got out, within the first 18 months, somebody told me the FBI was around asking about us in our hometown if we kept our mouths shut even after we were out. So it was very, very interesting that young people at that time were given cryptologic and top secret clearances when they were only 19, 20 years old. But maybe I'm getting political here when I say patriotism was stronger at that time, if that makes sense to you. So,
Is this from World War II? Is this a raffle ticket or
that
something?
belonged to my mother. I found that. Two of them, I think, from our World War II. I thought they'd go along good today.
Another war match, yeah, book.
I don't know what it was worth. I am old enough to remember that little, maybe they were plastic or hard cardboard, little tokens for buying sugar, gasoline, and something else. And when the war ended, they disappeared. We didn't have nearly the hardship that Europeans had.
Did you see a lot of that hardship? You said they were trying to build
Yes.
up the economy by giving people
Yeah,
jobs.
they employed Germans on the larger German bases, Wiesbaden, the large air bases, because the flyboys got treated a little better. They had gymnasiums, big basketball courts. I think some of the Rhine-Main large air forces, I think they employed 400 to 500 German civilians full-time. There was a lot of money going out to try and help their economy.
So you were there 12 years after the end of World War II, right?
Yes,
57,
yeah,
59.
right, 57.
How did the Germans feel about the Americans at that point? Were they?
It was still a little standoffish. I've got, on some of those items going around, I have a symbol that says it relates to Germans, some of the stories. My friend, he was on that picture of the guys, he married a German girl. After that, his job was in the motor pool. He changed tires and patched and painted, and he had been out in the field with us for close to a year. He moved off base and they lived together on the economy, and he didn't ask us questions because we wouldn't have told him. He took it. In fact, 3 or 4 years ago, he was still living in Michigan. His wife's name is Emma. And my other friend almost married one, but didn't do it. There's an article in a book about Halloween. And one friend tried to start Halloween over there. And that's an interesting story in itself. The table of contents, it's 3 pages, so there's different, you're looking at different things. So now, those of you that are interested, I've got 2 books for sale. The stories are exactly the same. One book has about 12 or 15 spelling errors in it, and 5 or 6 punctuation errors. The other book doesn't have that. The story, it may have others, but I had this book proofread by a valedictorian and an attorney and another person, and they still got through. You missed. Oh, I was interested in the stories. And if you read your own story, you aren't going to see your own mistakes because you read what you want it to read. So the one book with stories are the same. Anybody who's interested in Europe or service in Europe or has a relative, that book I'm selling that for $10. That's less than what it cost me to format it and have it printed. I'm not counting the Joy of Love for printing it. And the other book, the better book, that's $15. So that I make maybe $1.50 on, not counting my time. So if anybody,
You're gonna be rich.
yeah, I should have kept track. I could take a loss for a couple of years. So, any other questions? You got good questions. I can see why you would ask.
Oh, yeah. So did the Russians use International Morse code
Yes.
also?
Yes, but an to them wasn't an H to us. And an
Okay.
I think an H, I don't remember now, an H might have been one dip, two dashes, and another dip.
Okay.
Right, if they sent a dip, two dashes, and a dip, it meant something in their alphabet.
Okay.
So we would write H when we heard that,
Okay.
and send it to the brainiacs to
They
figure
use
out
the
what it
Cyrillic-
meant.
The Russians use the Cyrillic alphabet, which is different than
Right,
our
yeah,
alphabet.
yeah. So, but it stood for something, they still use the code. If you wanna find something interesting, I forget exactly the way it goes, the guy who formulated the International Morse code tried to do something else that didn't work out for him, completely different. I think it was like 1880s or something, came up with that as a very, very used system of communications. I think the reason it didn't change is because they thought if their alphabet's different, that'll take care of it.
And you never got into Berlin doing
No.
any eavesdropping?
No, I could not go to Berlin unless my job took me there. Nobody, there were ASA people there, but we couldn't go if our job did. And for several years afterwards, we weren't supposed to go. So maybe that'll be next, so. So if you wanna, while you're looking at items there, wanna come up with more questions you have?
So you didn't speak Russian or
No.
German, did you?
No.
Just writing the letters down?
We,
Was that-
we wrote the letter in English, and they handled us.
How did you know what was a word and just,
We didn't, if it came, this letter is one dit, I remember that.
That's
A is dit, and the T is dot, one short, this is one long. And I think this was floor symbol, I think it was dit, da, da, dit, and this is the da, da, dit, or something. This is a long time ago. And we put down an H.
So you.
The psychoanalyst took that H and translated it into whatever Russian, whatever that was in Russian.
so the people who spoke the language?
Yeah, they were supposed to figure it out.
So you basically listened on a headset.
Yes.
And you'd hear dit dot,
Yeah,
dot, dot,
yes,
dit, and
yes.
write down
We'd
what
be
you
doing it
heard.
with pencil, yeah.
Yeah.
And some guys used a typewriter and typed it too, but when we first got there. But that was a job that some people had for 2 years, and I'm glad we had the extra training to go out and do jamming and communicate and train. Because they would be, their shifts generally were 6 on and 3 off, or 3.5 on. 8 hours of doing that for 2 years,
Yeah.
yeah.
So did you ever get shot at when you were out doing stuff?
There was a bunch of shooting, although there's a chapter in here where my sergeant and I got too close to the Iron Curtain, and on the other side of that cloud strip, the first one, all of a sudden I think it was the Russians were coming along on a half-track pointing a mounted machine gun at us, because we were too close. Only our MPs and Border Patrol were supposed to be close. That's when my sergeant decided to go for a shortcut. It's in a book. It was a short, he said it was a shortcut given to him by a colonel up at battalion. Yeah. So in the story I say, if a colonel was ever involved.
They really wanted to know about the Russian response time. So they really
Well,
convinced you to go
yeah.
out and wander around and see how long it took the Russians to show up.
That's chapter, that's, our meal had to go through Hadley Hill.
Wandering in North.
It's a chapter.
That was South Korea.
Yeah.
So, it was a very nervous time, because Khrushchev was in power and he buffaloed a lot of people, or maybe he was real, I don't know. We didn't have a war, thank goodness. Yes, ma'am.
On number 37, what does that mean, bivouac anywhere? Is that like camping?
Yeah, it's like camping.
What is bivouac? I've
You
heard
go out,
the word a
you
lot.
go out and you make your camp. Yes, exactly. You take your shelter hats and your tents and your stoves and you go out where they tell you to go.
Okay.
And then you rough it for a couple of days, exactly.
I never thought about what it meant. You hear that
Yes.
word a lot.
Were you up by Castle all the time, or were you down by Frankfurt sometimes?
Castle, well, our base was Rothwestern, which was like 8 miles out of Castle, but Germany's so populated, they just run into the other. Our station was Rothwestern, we probably spent 40% of our time off base, at Allied bases training, or on bivouacking our maneuvers, trying to mess with the other side electronically. Other questions?
Well, Jerry, thank you.
Okay.
It was very interesting. That's a whole
It was,
side of
it was more fun writing the book than it was being over there.